Hey, Nige. Hey, I think there's a mute button on the bottom of your screen. You got to unmute it. At the very bottom, on the left-hand side, there's a menu, and you click unmute. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, so at the very bottom, there's a menu, and it says mute or unmute. Hello?
Hello.
Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Hey. All right. Hey, sorry for the mix up. Hey, there's your lovely wife there. Hi there.
Hi.
Hi.
I have to, because Rick, I'm not very good technically. Krista's the one who does. But Krista, bring it. Come and sit here, because you can help. Rick, I'm not great technically. Krista's a lot better than I am, you know. And also, I think my iPad is 8 years old. So a lot of things that the newer iPads, it's a very old operating system, you know, 8 years old. So it's not always too great. Anyway, at least this has worked.
Yeah.
Krista tried to do a Zoom a couple of weeks ago with her book club and just didn't get it right. So I'm quite glad to see this is working. Which is good. Okay. Put it on there. And it's vertical. Does that work? Yes, that's, yeah, otherwise I don't see Rick. Until the top of his head's cut off.
Oh. Is that better?
Okay.
How's that?
That's better. Now I can see you. Yes, I can see all of you. Yeah. So Rick, you'd forgotten. I wasn't really quite prepared for today, but it's absolutely fine because Krista went to the dentist this morning and she got back virtually on 1 o'clock. And I got back from taking the dog for a walk. Normally I go into town with her, but I didn't this morning because I had things to do at home. So that's perfect. And you got Chris's message there that he's not.
Yeah, I got Chris's message. Yeah. Yeah. Somehow I thought her dentist appointment was last Monday.
It was this morning, but that's fine, Rick. It's okay. So it's worked out fine. Yeah.
So anyway, what I want, I'm doing a whole series of talk stories. Talk stories is a slang word for conversations. It's a Hawaiian slang word. And so I'm to all the most important people in my life, and you're definitely one of them. It's kind of amazing. I was in Cape Town in your home probably for only about 3 months. But that was one of the most significant 3 months, in my life. So I kind of want to, kind of go over, I landed, I remember in Johannesburg, and I spent about a week or 2 weeks there, and then I took a plane, to Cape Town, and I kind of want to go over your journey because you did the same journey that I did. We went from Europe overland to India. So I kind of want to just first get into your journey of going overland and the time you spent in India, and then at that point, because I think it was a year earlier than when I was there. I was in India in 71. I think you were in 69 or 70, right?
No, I was also 71, Rick. As happens, I didn't go overland. I flew over. There were 29 of us that all wanted to go and see Morocco. It was 1970. and we all wanted to go and see Miraji. You know, there'd only been 2 or 3 other guys, people from London, that actually had met Miraji, because Miraji was 11 then. In fact, I went, by the time I got there, after I'd been there for a year, I went to his 13th birthday. But the 29 of us that wanted to go overland, I was going to join them, but I had a court case where I had to be tried by a jury. So I couldn't leave London and go. You know, it tied me down. The court case eventually came up. And the day I went to the court, there was another Nigel Fairhead, somebody by exactly the same name. And they brought his case on instead of mine. I had specially been to the courts and asked them to hurry up my case, because I wanted to leave London. I wanted to go to India, you know. And anyway, they did it the following week. And old Charanand, Mahatma Guru Charanand, came along to my court case, in fact.
Oh, wow, wow.
But by then, the 29 guys, there was 27 by that stage, left, because Nettie and I, you know, I'd married Nettie, and we were all going to go together. So we couldn't join them. They had 2 old bread vans that they were going overland in. So Nettie and I, we wanted to be there for Hans Jayanti, 1970, which was in, what is it? When's Hans Jayanti? November, I think.
November, yeah.
November. We actually flew out on a real old battleship of an aeroplane. It was called Basco Airlines, Brothers Air Services Company Limited. And it was a real old rattletrap of a plane. But it made it. We got to Delhi and then caught a train up to, we got to Bombay. The plane arrived in Bombay. And Nettie and I caught a train up to Delhi. Shall I tell you about that train trip, Rick? I mean, it was horrendous. You know, I have never, it was quite a culture shock arriving by plane and arriving in Bombay. And we were on the station, and I have just never seen so many people. You know, there were people that were like skin and bone walking around. There were lepers on the station. There were young kids. There were hustlers. There was just so many people. But we were waiting for a train, and if you wanted to book a seat, you had to book like 4 or 5 days in advance. So we couldn't do that. And I bumped into an American guy on the station, and he was there to see Krishnamurti.
Oh, wow.
And he'd been to India before. And he said to me, he said, "You see this little guy standing on the platform, go up and get one of them, and you give him a rupee or 2 rupees, and you give him a sleeping bag. And as the train comes in, he dives in the window and he rolls your sleeping bag out and books you a space." Well, I gave him the money, we gave him our sleeping bags. You know, Rick, we saw the train arriving in the distance. By the time it came in and stopped on the platform, there was not even sitting space on the floor or corridor. People just dived in the windows. It was absolute chaos.
Oh my God.
So it is the most uncomfortable journey I've ever done in my life. You know, in our compartment, there must have been 20, 30 people. At one time, Nettie, the Indians pushed her up onto a top bunk. She looked over the edge and she didn't see me, but there were just bodies on the floor. And she saw between a couple of bodies, she saw a white hand sticking out and realized that was me underneath those bodies. You know, it was unbelievably uncomfortable. Anyway, so, but we did make it to Delhi. We got there in time for Hans Jayanti on the 9th, 10th, 11th of November. Yeah, please. Yeah, so that was getting to Delhi, and we stayed in Delhi for, and it was an amazing festival, that Hans Jayanti. You know, there were, gosh, I don't know how many 100,000 people. It was huge. They had Miraji in a chariot, and they had a parade of elephants. We were actually walking through the streets of Delhi with this whole parade, and it was on a huge big piece of ground, and they fed all those people. It was quite an amazing event. Yeah, so we stayed there and did that event for 3 days. and then went to Premnagar Ashram, which is, I guess, where you went to follow. So you were there, Rick, when did you say 71?
I was in 71, yeah. I was there the very first day the India-Pakistan war across the border. And this was in 1971. And so then I went to a Sikh temple and said, because I always heard, Sikhs will allow you to, spend the night in their temple. But I went there and they said, well, I'm sorry, you can't stay here. But they said, but there's a festival going on down the block. So this is, Maharaji just returned from the West. So this is the very last day of the Hanshyante festival. So I go to the festival grounds. And I met this guy named Guy Nori, and so he told me what was going on. So I haven't talked to him in over about 50 years. And I just had a talk story with him just a couple days ago. So it's kind of neat. I'm kind of, meeting, all these people I haven't talked to in ages. So anyway, I did the same thing. Took the same train, from Delhi to Premnagar.
Yeah.
So
Rick, I was there in 1970, but I was there in 71 as well, because in 1970, the 29 of us that were there, I remember Mataji came at one time. We were all on the ashram, and we thought we were going to stay there for the rest of our lives. We didn't think we'd ever go back to the West, And I think Mataji thought, these are a lazy bunch of bums, And she came and she said, come on, you guys, go back to your country and spread knowledge. Go back to London. Go back to your countries, And so we stayed another month or two on the ashram, and then everybody started heading home. And Lynette, my wife, she wanted to come to South Africa to see her parents. I didn't really want to come to South Africa. I wanted to go back to London, but I wasn't quite ready to leave. So we left the ashram. That's what happened. We left the ashram and we went down to Bombay, and we wanted to you could get a cheap boat over from Bombay over to Africa. And because we were hippies, they would allow you to sleep out on deck. So the cost of the ticket was deck class. It was very cheap. But exactly that war, the war between Pakistan and India, was happening. And because of that, they had blackouts in the evenings, and none of the ships were leaving Bombay Harbor to go across to Africa. So there we were stuck in Bombay. So we kind of looked at each other, and we'd spent a week or so in Bombay and didn't particularly like it. And somebody said, why don't you go to Goa? So I said, okay, that sounds good. And I said, no, there's an overnight boat. You can just book on this boat, and and it was a full moon that night. We got on this boat, and we went down to Goa, which is from Bombay, 500-600 kilometers south. And we arrived at Goa to kill time while the war was on. Ended up staying there for 6 months, sleeping out on the beach. And when the rains came, we moved into a little, what they call a house. It's very much like an African rural house in this country. There's no windows, there's no glass or anything like that. There's just a big gap. And they're sort of shutters. As the rainstorm comes, you pull the shutters, you close the shutters. And they're mud floors. Mud floors are made, they mix cow dung and mud together and then flattened on the floor. Very common in Africa, so I'm very used to that. So we just slept on cow dung floors, and there were these shutters. And so when the rains came, we actually couldn't sleep out anymore, obviously. So we moved into this little cottage, and or house, whatever you want to call it, and stayed there. And then that's when Nettie decided she wanted to come and see her parents in South Africa. I didn't. I wanted to go back to London. So I decided to go to a yoga ashram and do a hatha yoga course, which is what I did. For 3 months, I went and did a hatha yoga course. And I said to Lynette I would meet her back in London, after the few months passed. And it was during that time that we heard Maharaji was going to go to South Africa. So Nettie sent me an airplane ticket. The boats still weren't leaving the harbour. So Nettie sent me an airplane ticket to arrive in South Africa. And I arrived in Johannesburg, hitchhiked down to Cape Town, and Miraji was going to be coming, and he was going to be coming, and he was going to be coming. A month would pass, second month, third month. You know how it kind of is with festivals. Anyway, it took him a long time, and I started running out of bucks, and I had to get a job. So I cut my hair, had a haircut, and got a job in Cape Town. There weren't really any other premies. There was Nettie and myself, and there was an Indian family, or a husband and a wife. They were premies. Most of it, there were a lot of Indian premies in South Africa, but not really Europeans, you know, so-called Europeans. So Nettie and I stayed there and waited for Marathi to come. And with him, and you know, before he arrived, guys like yourself arrived, Gary Gerard, Milky, a whole lot of folks started coming, preparing the way for Marathi to arrive. Went to Johannesburg first, and then came down to Cape Town. You know, but you know, Rick, it was actually a wonderful time in my life. You know, thinking back of, you know, that was 1972. And during that time, you know, I mean, more people became premies in Cape Town, and more European people in Johannesburg as well. So, and there was kind of satsang every night, 7 nights a week. We used to have satsang, and those, you know, started having pretty quickly. Yeah, it was also a time that I fell in love with Cape Town, because I really hadn't intended to stay there. I wanted to go back to London. I'd been living in London before we went to India. And it took me another year, and my daughter was born during a year, towards the end of 72. So that's 48 years ago. She's about to turn 48. Yeah.
Wow.
So I stayed there for that year in 1972, got a job, and I worked for 73, 74. And then eventually I decided, no, I think I want to go back to London after all. And Rick, I went back in February of 75. And I can remember in London, I had this image in my head that I wanted to be back in London. I'd had such a nice time there in the late 60s. And I can remember arriving in February and getting off the plane and going into London. And it was just grey. The buildings were grey. The sky was grey. People looked grey. The clothes they were wearing was grey. And I looked, I thought, my God, what am I doing here? What am I doing in this place? You know? Anyway, I'd taken all the trouble and saved enough bucks to get there. So I kind of stayed there for the rest of that year. But, you know, compared to Cape Town, it was like, it really wasn't where I wanted to be. I mean, I'd loved Cape Town. I used to climb, go on the mountain every day of my life. I used to take my little barragan, walk up the mountain and go and sit and meditate in the forest. And Cape Town was, you know, such a beautiful city, you know, with ocean and beaches and forests and mountains. And I mean, and the freedom you have there, you know, compared to the congestion of a place like London, really. So, so at the end of that year, I actually came back to Cape Town, and I never left until I came to live here on the Garden Route, which is equally beautiful to Cape Town, you know. So I was in Cape Town, Rick, for 31 years, I think.
Wow.
It was. Time I went back to 55. Started my own business, making shoes for over 20 years, and bought a house and lived happily there. So it was great. And by then there was a really nice Premier community in the early 70s, right through into the 80s. You know, it never really grew very big. There were probably a group of about 30 of us, but those became my best friends, and they still are all these years later. Premies are, you know, most of them are alive, some have moved on already. You know, it's just life. So it was great times, Rick. It honestly was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you ever have any pictures of that church? Remember the church where we stayed?
Do I have any pictures?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, Rick, I don't actually, you know. I was married to Nettie, you know. We were together for about 8 years. But then after we split up, I married Brenda, and Brenda was an avid photographer. She took loads and loads of photographs, but none of the church, much later on in life. You know, that was like late
Yeah.
70s and early 80s. I have lots of pictures, but not from those early days in 70s, unfortunately.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I met somebody who lives on the garden route here who actually we rented that church, Nettie and I did, you know, and we had various people staying and sharing it with us.
Uh-huh.
But I met a girl who lives up here, Potter, and she actually bought the church. It was owned by an architect, and he had it made into a national monument so it would be preserved. And when he died, it got sold, and she bought that church and lived in it for a while, you know. Yeah, and she lives quite close to where I live up here on the garden route. You know, we're about 500 kilometers away from Cape Town.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, unfortunately, Rick, I don't have
Yeah.
any. I mean, it would have been nice because it was a funky little church, you know, with those little moonflower trees in that little back courtyard, and the vestry turned into a living area with a sit-in bath. You know, the vestry was really small, so that bathroom was minute with a sit-in bath and a
Uh-huh.
tiny little kitchen and 2 beds and one little table with a bench on either side, all built in. You know, as I said, Brian, the guy who owned it, was an architect, so he
Yeah.
had actually designed it really neatly, that little kitchen. And then the man, in fact, Nicky and I lived in that little vestry for a year or two, and then I don't know what happened, because I ended up sleeping on the altar for the last 9 months that I was there. I think, you know, we had
Uh-huh.
a double mattress perched on the altar, and
That's
then
why
the
I was
rest of the
sleeping.
church was, we had it divided. Huh?
That's why I was sleeping
Yeah.
in the altar, in that, right?
You on the altar, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, because remember we had a partition. Mark Best was partitioned off, our Marco. And
Uh-huh.
Marco comes to visit me every year. He was in February this year. He's come he comes up to the garden route for a week or 10 days every year. So he was here this year in February.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so Mark was living in that partition right next to the altar. So you would have been sleeping up on the altar. Debbie had, after you moved from there, Debbie started sleeping on the altar. Debbie Turtlebrun, if you
Yeah,
remember.
Debbie. I remember Debbie. Yep. Yep. Uh-huh.
And then the far end of the church, which was half of the main building, you know, Master Church, was all open space. And that's where I used that to teach Hatha Yoga. I had pupils coming in there, and I would teach Hatha Yoga in that section of the church.
Yeah.
I think I did that for about a year, you know.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, before I went back to London, so it was. Yeah, I have very fond memories of that.
Yeah.
that
You know, when Raji came, how big was that hall in Cape Town? How many people came?
How big was the hall?
Yeah. Do you have any idea?
Well, Rick, you know, we did one session up at the university, if you remember.
Right, I remember the university.
They
Yeah.
call that Jamison Hall. That's a big hall, you know, that can probably take 1,000 people. But we also did one at a hall in Salt River, which was a much smaller hall, which you wouldn't get more than a couple of hundred people in, if that.
Uh-huh.
You know?
Yeah, I remember
Those
that
are the
big
two events
hall.
that I remember.
I remember the big hall at the Cape Town University. That's what I
Yes.
remember. So see about 1,000. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember initially, when I went to the university, I would speak outdoors, and then gradually they gave me a room of my own. Do you remember that? That was pretty cool. So I had a room.
Who gave you a room, guy?
This was, you know, first I was talking, you know, to people about Meraji coming outdoors on campus. And then the student council, you know, saw what I was doing, and they said, oh, we can give you a room of your own. So every day, like Monday through Friday, I would go to the university and I would have a room, and so people would come in and I would talk. I don't know if you remember that.
Gosh, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember that, actually.
I think I either hitchhiked, you know, from your house to the university. I think it was like 3 miles away, 4 miles away. Was it something like that?
You know, Rick, it was only probably about a 20-minute, 25-minute walk, because that little church to the end of Newlands Avenue is probably between 5 and 10 minutes, and then from the end of Newlands Avenue up to the university is only a 8 or 10-minute walk, you know, slightly up the hill. That, no, it was close by. It was about a 20-minute walk. You know?
Okay. Yeah.
Easy to get
Uh-huh.
from there. Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful university, also lovely ground, you know, lovely old wall fronting onto the highway with Golden Virginia creeper. It's a lovely old stone wall with playing fields behind it. And once you're up at the campus, it's quite elevated, you know, it's quite high up Table Mountain in one way. And you
Uh-huh.
look right across the whole of the Cape Flats to the Hottentot Holland Mountains in the distance, which is out towards Somerset West, Stellenbosch Way. It's beautiful. In
Mhm.
fact, I used to go and play tennis up there. Brenda and I used to go and play tennis. Mahatma Gurutaranan came to stay with us. I was living in Kenilworth, and he stayed with us for a month or 6 weeks, I think it was.
Well,
He said,
oh,
Nigel,
wow.
you don't play. You've got to learn to play tennis. Typical Charanan, he took us to a sports shop and showed us which tennis rackets to buy. And we went up every day up to the campus tennis courts, which were beautiful because they had these spectacular views of the
Yeah.
mountains in the distance.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful tennis courts. Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, Charanan us to play tennis, and we'd go up every day and have a game of tennis. It was great.
I played with him just a few times, and I was living in Vancouver, Canada. He was a pretty good tennis player for someone his age, wasn't he?
Yeah. Now he got really into it. He was really into it. He was quite fanatical about tennis.
Yeah.
Charanan was.
Yeah, I haven't seen him.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, me neither. You know, Rick, I haven't for a long time. But, you know, in those early years, I would see him regularly because in the 70s and early 80s and possibly even into the late 80s and maybe early 90s, I always used to go to programs. You know, I guess I've been to the States 3 times, even if it's only for a week at a time. I don't know how many times I've been to Europe, also for a week at a time. And quite often I would bump into Charanan there. You know, those festivals are big. You know, you'd have like 12, 15,000 people. So, but for a good number of years, I used to go to those festivals.
Mhm.
And then he stopped as my business grew and I needed to invest more money and put it back into the business, which was probably late 80s, early 90s. I kind of stopped going to those festivals. You know, we still had satsang every night in Cape Town, and I was part of that community right up
Mhm.
until I left and came to live, which is a long time ago now, 16 years, going on 17 years that I've been living on the Garden Route. So, yeah, so I don't really, yeah, I haven't seen him for many years. So.
Mhm. Yeah, likewise. Yeah. Did you see that
Well,
surfing?
I've been listening to Rick. I've been listening to that guy, Satguru, you know,
Yeah.
not Miraji.
Yeah. Oh, he's
Been listening,
amazing.
and I've been listening. Yeah, he's great. So, yeah, we listened to quite a lot of his talks and
Uh-huh.
satsang. You know, I haven't listened to Miraji satsang for some years now. Since I spoke to you last, Rick, remember I was going through a stage and getting a bit irritated with the whole of the whole
Yeah.
Miraji thing. And I do agree with you. And I remember you very polite. You said, "Well, you just had slight issues with his lifestyle," you know. And I guess I agreed completely. His lifestyle, you know, didn't
Mhm.
agree with what he's up to. You know,
Did you see that
yeah,
wave video? That was pretty cool. I sent you and Nigel. It was a video of the ocean waves breaking. I sent it to you. I think about a couple days ago. Now that to be there's a video of Maraji speaking, and as these waves are breaking in slow motion. It was at times that was probably one of the most picturesque videos I've ever seen, especially being a surfer, because it was all talking about the ocean. So, and you know how anybody who talks about the ocean, I'm a sucker. you know, I
yeah,
and that was definitely one of those. But Sadhguru, yeah, I listen to him all the time too. That he's
yeah,
incredible. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
he's definitely got wisdom behind him.
Yeah. Yeah,
especially
no,
the variation of the topics. You know, he can talk them almost on anything. You know.
yeah, he's quite knowledgeable on a lot of subjects. Huh?
Yeah.
I've noticed that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
So then,
yeah.
um, and I mean, I remember Debbie was there. You said now she's back in England,
Who,
Debbie?
Debbie?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
No, no, Debbie's right. In fact, Debbie's arriving this Friday. She's coming to visit me just for a week or so.
Oh, whoa, whoa.
Yeah, no, she's living in Cape Town. You know, she lived in London, in the UK, for about 14 years, and then she and her husband came back. Gosh, well, sometime in the 80s, I think it might have been, or maybe 90s actually.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it would have been the 90s. Her two girls. In fact, I just went to the older girl's wedding in January this year, and she's 32. So, and she was a good friend of Kia when Kia was alive, which was the early 90s. Yeah, Kia was born in 88, the early 90s, and they came back. Debbie's two daughters were about 6 or 7, maybe 8 years old when they came back from the UK.
Oh, wow.
So she's
Okay.
been back for a long time now. In
Uh-huh.
fact, Debbie's husband died in January last year, and I went up to be with Debbie. You know, he was a doctor, so he knew exactly what was happening to him. And Debbie wanted me there. You know, she just wanted her two daughters and me to be there. He was going to do a home death, you know,
Yeah.
died at home. He decided that was what he wanted, and we just kind of stayed with him and held his hand and watched him through it over the last 2 weeks. We just watched him
Oh,
getting
wow.
weaker and weaker.
Wow.
He had stage 4 lung cancer. So it was a gradual process. You know, he'd phoned me one day 8 or 9 months before, told me he had stage 4 lung cancer. Being a medical person, he knew exactly how long he would probably last, what the prognosis was, and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah, we just watched him peacefully pass away, and it was, Rick, it was quite an experience to watch him moving on. You know, really just quite peacefully. You know, he wasn't a believer, you know, like we are. He didn't have that strong belief that we have at all. So I think that he went peacefully, but I think there was a degree of fear there and not knowing at all, you know. So I think it was not that what he really didn't want to leave. You know, I saw him crying a number of times. And sort of one day, like about a week before he actually finally died, he asked me to bring him a mirror. And he hadn't looked at himself in a mirror for about 10 days, I don't think, because he was in bed. And I held up the mirror, and he waved to himself and started crying and said goodbye. You know,
Oh, wow.
there was a sadness to his parting, Rick, you know. So, look, Debbie's excellent. Debbie had been a nurse. You know, Debbie's a psychologist, and she'd been a really good nurse before she did psychology. And so she really helped him and through the whole process as well. And, you know, having the whole family, I was there, the two daughters were there. So, and that's all he wanted. He just wanted family around and people that
Oh,
he
wow.
knew and
Wow.
loved. It just helped the process go. But you could see that he wasn't wanting to go.
Yeah.
And obviously it was very sad for Debbie because he was, you know, I say only 64 or 66, I think he was. And Debbie said if only he'd lived at least for another 4 or 5 years. He'd only been retired for 2 years. You know, he took early retirement. I think Debbie knew him having been a heavy smoker. Either emphysema or cancer or something was very likely to get him. So
Oh,
she
wow.
got him to early retirement. It was nice. They traveled. They went up to Zimbabwe and they did a lot of traveling in that 2 years before he died. They had a lot of fun.
Wow.
So anyhow, it was quite a thing to just watch this whole process. Somebody leaving, you know. I'd never experienced that, Rick. I mean, I'd seen dead bodies being in India. You know, I had a friend who was actually surfing when we were living at Goa, and the rains came. It got incredibly stormy. We used to swim out to fishing boats, Rick. You know, I mean, I was always a good swimmer. I loved swimming as a younger person at school, and so on, before I ever did surfing. But when I was at Goa, I used to swim out to the fishing boats, which were probably, some of them were almost a kilometer out to sea.
Wow.
So I would swim out to them. You know, I loved it. And the water, you know, there were little gentle waves lapping on the shore at Goa. Rick, when the rains arrived, the storms, you cannot believe it. If you wouldn't even walk in waist deep, you'd get dragged out into the ocean. The rips and the currents were so strong when the rains came. And most of the people at this little village where I was staying, on the outskirts of a little village, there were only 3 Canadians, 1 English guy, and myself and Nettie. Everybody else had gone up to Kathmandu and up to the mountains where it was cooler, because the temperatures that month before the rains arrive are unbearable. You know, you can't sleep at night. You just sweat. It's just hot. I get up at 4 in the morning and I just see the sweat pouring down my chest. It was like,
oh my gosh.
No, it was unbearable. So anyway, we stayed there and brought it up, and it was such a relief. When the rains finally arrived, I can remember just running naked out into the rain. You know, we had the well. There was one well in the whole village. All the other wells had dried up, and you put a pot down on a rope, and you could get some muddy water out of this well, and that's the only drinking water you had. I had boils on my arm, I had boils on my foot, you know, everything, nothing was clean, you know. And within a week of the rains arriving, the wells were all overflowing, there were frogs croaking, we were drinking fresh water, my oils cleared up, I wasn't walking with a walking stick anymore, I could walk without the aid of a walk. We were buggered, Rick, you know, really, just before the rains arrived. It was hectic in India at that time, you know? And I remember going to the hospital in Panajim, which is probably 40 miles away from where we were camping on the beach and so on. And I spoke to doctors there, and they just said, oh, eat pawpaws and mangoes, you know. That's what you do. There's nothing else you can do. Here, we needed the rains to arrive and get fresh water, and it just flushed out the system. It was incredible. But anyway, I'll go back to what I was talking about. There was this one English guy, and there'd been a couple of Australian guys on our beach, and they'd left a surfboard for him. And he decided he was going to do surfing, but he wasn't a very experienced surfer. And at the end of the day, the 3 Canadians came, they said, have you seen John? He hasn't appeared back. He was down on the beach surfing. Yeah, and we couldn't find him. We walked up and down the beach, and the next morning we found the surfboard washed up, and we realized that he must have drowned.
Oh my God.
And it took us, we didn't find his body that day nor the next day. We walked up and down the beaches looking for him, you know, and 3 days later, he washed up a couple of kilometers away from where we were staying. And we had to go down and get his body and try and drag it up some cliffs and so on. It's not a nice experience at all. But what I was saying, you know, I have seen dead bodies. It's not a completely new experience, but not in a nice way. And I can remember at Premnagar Ashram, I used to go down to the Ganges every day and I washed my clothes, and the odd body would float past in the Ganges there.
Oh my gosh.
You would see that, you know? Yeah.
Oh wow. So how's your meditations been? I know it's kind of amazing. I think, if we look back to where we were, let's say when we were 18, 19 years old and where we are today, it's a difference between night and day. But yet, day by day, we never know how far we've gone. Because I know, so many, people say, I'm not getting anything out of it. But then you look back, like 40, 50 years, and you see, wow, I've gotten a lot out of this. And don't you think, inspiration, really, I think there's no big leaps on this path. Once you say that, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's kind of like my way of thinking and my way of training. What do you think about that?
Yeah, Rick, I agree. You know, look, it's a very gradual it's a gradual process. You know, I mean, I know, I know what I was very, I kind of had ambition when I first started doing meditation. You know, I mean, I had heard about these yogis that could sit and virtually go into such a deep state that they would pre-experience the death state before the physical body would actually die. And I had thought that's what meditation would do for me. Well, you know, many years later, I realized that wasn't going to happen. It's a gradual, slow process of doing it, you know. And I would just spend, you know, I spent years, and meditation didn't come easily, Rick, for me. You know, I would sit, and I think it was the case. That was the case with a lot of preachers. I think you're one of the few people I know who just seems to be a natural meditator, Rick. I don't think I've met anybody else who found it as easy as you do. You know, most people I've known, all of the premies and so on, would struggle to sit for in those days, it was an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. You'd sit for an hour and you wouldn't turn up for breakfast and go and look for you, and you'd still be sitting meditating 2 hours later. That was the kind of the way you were, you know. But I don't know anybody else that was like that. We would struggle to meditate, but pursued it, Rick, and got to a state of just a relaxed kind of state, you know. So I'd agree with you saying 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And I kind of, throughout my life, I've gone in a meditation and then I stopped for a period of time and gone off the path, not off the path, just got on with life, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And then realized there's something missing, and I'll get back into meditation again. That's kind of been in and out and in and out. So it's a journey, Rick. It really is. It's a journey, you know. I mean, now I don't get up every morning and meditate like I did for those first 10, 15 years of being a premie. I often sit in the evening, I sit on my bed upstairs. Rick, I've got a bedroom upstairs in this house in the garden room. And when I sit on my bed, I look out, I've got a big upstairs window, and it looks out of the George Mountain across some forest. It's a beautiful place. And in winter, the sun sets over that mountain. So I often go and sit up there and have a really quiet time at sunset time, you know.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Beautiful. So that's my kind of, that's when I like to sit quiet. It's just a natural, peaceful time for me. So that's what I've been doing lately, actually, you know, just sitting and going inside and quietly. So, yeah, it is a gradual process.
And I think it's also, too, meditation is custom designed for each one of us. You know, I don't think there's only, to be honest, there's only one way to meditate. I mean, you know, especially in the last 30 years, I love, you know, going into, like, for example, I just wrote a book on the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. So I got all involved in the meditation techniques, you know, for Patanjali. Then I wrote a book on the Jains, on nonviolence. So I got involved with all their, you know, meditation techniques. And then, you know, I've been into like Zen Buddhism, and I think all of them are kind of like custom designed for each one. You know, that you can almost like pick and choose. There's not one way is the only way. That's kind of like my personal belief. You know, is that we, you know, whatever comes our way, I think whatever comes your way, if you utilize it, you'll get some benefit out of it. I remember even years ago when people would meditate on a candle, I would kind of, who'd ever do that? But then, you know, once I saw, you know, yeah, meditating on a candle could be a very powerful thing because you can train your mind to concentrate. Everything is a tool.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely learning that, you know, that I wrote a book called Tricks of the Trade, you know, so that I have my own personal tricks. So, and
okay. Yeah.
And I think you're doing the same thing, kind of exploring, aren't you? You know, in terms of knowing there's not one way.
Well, Rick, you know, I can remember before I took knowledge, you know, I used to also light a candle and just look at it. A candle is a very peaceful thing. If you're in a room and a candle is burning, just one candle, and you focus on that candle, and the area is still around it. It's an incredibly peaceful energy. So I used to love actually having a candlelight and just staring at it and breathing slowly and relaxing with it, you know. So it was kind of a meditation for me in those earlier years before I heard about Miraji. It was, yeah. And I also used to be quite, as early premies, we used to think there was only one way you had to do these 4 techniques. After not many years, I never really felt comfortable using a barrag and doing the 4 techniques. I like to just sit down and practice all of them, not the tongue one so much, you know, but certainly looking at the light, the breathing and sound, the harmony, you know. But I didn't want to practice them individually. I just kind of combine the whole. I just sit peacefully and do it in my own way. And I think it is like that. It's fine. Everybody finds their own way. I remember in those early years, you know, there's a lot of, in South Africa, a lot of people call the Satsangis, you know, they follow Charan Singh. Remember Charan Singh?
Oh, Charan Singh, yeah.
Maybe not. He's no longer alive. Well, there are a lot of his followers in, you know, he's not alive any longer, but his nephew, Gurunda Singh, took over the movement after he died. In fact, I want to, you know, a lot of his followers here, I've never seen him been before Miraji came to South Africa, or maybe it was shortly afterwards. You know, and he was the typical guru, looks a little bit like Sadhguru, you know, an old man with a long grey white beard and white hair and robes and so on.
Yeah.
But I actually saw Charan Singh. He came to South Africa, gosh, I don't remember what year it was. It might have been late 70s or something like that, Rick, you know. So I did see him, and I would go along even in those days and listen to other teachers, you know, not like premies. We think, oh, only Miraji, you know, we were quite...
But you know that
Miraji. There was another guy that...
There's Kirpal Singh. Kirpal Singh?
There was another guy based in...
Yeah, you know, there is a lineage called the Radha Samadhi lineage. And in that lineage, you know, Sri Miraji was part of that, and you know, and the Kirpal Singh and Charan Singh, they were all from that Radha Samadhi lineage. So that's why their meditation, you know, the techniques are extremely similar. Let's put it that way.
That's right. They were. That's what I used to think, that they had 3 techniques, but not 4 of them. I used to think that, but it's not the case. But I've got a lot of friends who are satsangis. They happen to, on the garden route, there are a lot of satsangis living on the garden route, which is nice because we have the same common outlook in life, you know, the same understanding. So it's great. Yeah.
But, you know, my experience is... I was going to say, my experience is the same with you. Just by closing your eyes and focusing behind your breath, everything comes alive. You know, the light is there. You know, the sound is there. You know, it's all emanating from that spark within.
Yeah.
I remember we had a conversation about that. Must have been about a couple of years ago. You know, where you know both of us realized, you know, the same thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I used to listen to, there was a guy that used to come from Mauritius. And I used to go and listen to his satsang. He'd come to Cape Town fairly regularly because Mauritius is not that far from South Africa. And they were called, Miraji's movement was called, if you remember, Divine Light Mission in those early years. And this group was called Divine Life Society, and there were quite a lot of Indian followers of his in Cape Town. So just for inspiration, I used to go and listen to him a lot as well. So yeah, I'm happy to listen to any of these satsangs. Yeah, great.
Yeah. So when Debbie comes, you know, hey, you know, it'd be cool to do a Zoom session with her. Because I haven't talked to her since Cape Town.
haven't they, Rick? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, we phone each other from time to time. She doesn't like, she doesn't even do face calls, just voice
oh,
calls.
oh, a
She
voice.
phones, she's not into doing face calls. Well, no, maybe not true, because when her one daughter is still living in England, and I think she does do Skype or maybe Zoom by now, she's doing. I think she used to do that with her daughter. But I know when she phones at me, she just always does voice.
Well,
Voice
we can
calls, which
always
is
do a Zoom and have no video.
what you can do with no video. You can, so you can.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Under Zoom, under the menu, there's a video, and you could turn it off. So you could just hear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if
Well,
she wants to go that route, I'm more than willing,
yeah.
to go any route. It
Yeah.
just would be neat, to just talk to a dear friend, because yeah.
Yeah. Well, give us a call over then. She'll be here. She's coming on. She was going to be coming a week ago, but we've had really. I think she had some other commitments in Cape Town, and it's a friend of hers that's coming with her. Bronnie is also a close friend of mine, who I've known for 40 years odd. They're coming up together, the two of them.
Okay.
Debbie doesn't drive, so they're coming up, and they're coming on Friday. And I'm not sure when they're staying till, Nick. Originally, she said she'd stay for a week. And with this COVID-19, Debbie hasn't been working. But when she phoned a few days ago, she said suddenly they've told her she's got to go back to work. So she may only stay till the middle of next week, possibly till Wednesday or maybe Thursday. She hasn't indicated as yet. So anyway, so I think she'll be here from Friday evening, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, at least those days, and maybe the Wednesday, and maybe they'll go back on the Thursday or something like that.
Is that affecting you guys in South Africa? I guess it's affecting the whole world, huh?
Yeah, Rick, like the rest of the world, we've been on, in fact, South Africa's had one of the strictest lockdowns in the world, Rick.
Wow.
Very, very strict. We've had it for, it's almost militant in ways, Our government has been, they've been very strong about it. And, but it really has prevented the spread. It's on the way down now. We were one of the countries to get it a lot later than, Europe, for instance. But they've kept the numbers down, and certainly in the province where we live, Western Province, where they've had emergency hospitals, they're in huge big tents. They're closing those down now because the numbers are decreasing. In fact, the numbers are decreasing, but they're opening up the economy. The thing is, Rick, they've had this very, very strict lockdown. The economy has suffered like you can't believe. There are so many businesses that have gone bankrupt and closed down. I mean, it's another whole topic, this whole COVID thing, Rick. Chris sent me, I don't know if he sent you that thing, like the truth about vaccines. The same people who talk about vaccines, the whole this whole thing with Bill Gates and the pharmaceutical companies, I feel the same is about COVID-19. They talked a little bit about this whole COVID thing, what a farce this whole thing is, and how it has screwed up the whole world and the economy. So it's another whole topic in itself. But it really has affected South Africa. People have really lost their jobs. The unemployment has increased. People, we're a poor country. The economy in this country was doing really poorly before COVID hit. And now with COVID, it's just exacerbated. It's just made it so much worse. So it's been bad news for South Africa. So, but they banned alcohol and smoking even in this country, which they didn't do in other parts of the world. They had banned alcohol for 3.5 months, I think the first ban was, and the cigarettes have been banned for 5.5 months, and as of tomorrow, stores will be allowed to sell cigarettes again. So it's been nearly 6 months that cigarettes have been banned.
Wow.
And, but people still smoke. All it does is make the underworld, the guys who sell legally, they've just got stronger and stronger. So it hasn't really stopped people smoking. people are just having to pay double and triple the price for a packet of cigarettes. I'm not a smoker, so it doesn't affect me, but I know a lot of friends and people that do, and they're still getting cigarettes, but they're having to really pay dearly for them. And alcohol, you couldn't get alcohol there. There was no, that's been banned for a long time. And as of tomorrow, alcohol is unbanned as well. It was banned for 3.5 months. They opened it up for a month, and they had so much crime in this country after that, African people going around shooting each other, stabbings, motor vehicle accidents, people drink too much, and they fill up the hospitals. So they banned it again. So it's been banned for another 5 weeks until tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
5 weeks, it's been banned again. And from tomorrow, you can be sure within days, the hospital emergency wards will start filling up again. There will be motor car accidents. There'll be stabbings because a lot of the Africans in this country carry knives around. Not necessarily I hate to say, I don't mean to just say Africans, but there are a lot of a certain type that are very, very basic, Rick, and they're known for it. It's just historical. It's not just to do with COVID. It happened in this country every weekend. Emergency wards and hospitals get overworked because they have so many stabbings and gunshots and motor vehicle accidents.
Wow.
Alcohol, people drink.
Wow.
And they fight. They have what they call shebeens. They live in townships, and they have shebeens, which is a drinking, like a pub, I suppose, a communal pub. And they go there and they drink and they get drunk, and they end up having lots of fights and stabbings, So it's a problem in this country, Rick, this whole alcohol and violence, And violence against women in this country is probably the worst in the world, Rick. Unfortunately.
Oh, that's what I heard. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Jeez. Yeah. Wow.
Anyway,
Wow.
Yeah. I see a nice little. Is that a Buddha statue behind your left shoulder?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I love statues of Buddha, actually, Rick. I've got. Here's one right in front of me. I've got one right. Can you see?
Oh, cool. Oh, nice. Oh, okay.
I love statues of Buddha. I could collect these things. I've got them in various parts of the house.
Yeah, me too. We have about 4 or 5 in our house. Then we have this.
I've got about the same, Rick.
Yeah.
I love the meditating Buddha. It's just a nice. Well,
anyway,
I think I must move on. I've got things to do, but it's been very nice to chat and catch up. Too bad Chris couldn't. It's sad that Chris is having to work at this stage. I mean, I'm 74, and I know that I wouldn't be able to do what Chris is doing. Chris is he's just 4 years younger than I am, and having to do this really hard labor on a farm, moving old vehicles and working with big chains and cranes. And he says there's snakes in there. It sounds terrible what he's doing.
Oh my God! Oh gosh! Wow! I know. I feel sorry for the guy. And I guess Australia they don't have Social Security. In Australia, they probably don't have Social.
They do have a certain amount of it. Whether Chris is entitled to it, I'm not sure. He taught at a school with teaching English to foreigners, I think,
Yeah.
So, I don't know what the rule and how it works in Australia,
Yeah.
So, maybe he gets a certain amount of Social Security, maybe not. So he's really having to do that. So it's sad. Anyway, let's hope it's short-lived and that comes to an end for him.
Yeah, definitely.
Things start lifting. They're through, I think a lot of the world is through the worst part of it. So hopefully things start to lift up and get back to normalize a little bit anyway. Yeah.
Well, it's nice meeting your wife. Yeah, that was nice, just for a second there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not good without her, Rick, on these technical things. She made good use of our lockdown and this COVID-19. Chris was okay on the computer. She's got a desktop computer and her little cell phone and the tablet and so on. But she made very good use. She went on 2 courses and she's built a whole website for our business, selling clothing.
Oh, wow.
She's doing so online and a bit of marketing. She did a course on marketing as well.
Oh, wow. Oh,
So
hey.
her skills are a lot better. And yeah, no, she was working every night. She had a lecture at 8 o'clock at night, 8 till 9, and then homework the next morning, and then another lecture that evening. She would do that Monday to Friday. And so, yeah, she made good time as
Oh, cool. Oh, cool.
lockdown.
Yeah.
Good. Our market's opened up again, so we're back at our market on Sedgefield. You know, Rick, we sell our clothing at a market on a Saturday morning. I think it's probably one of the best markets in South Africa, the one we have on the garden route.
Also, you told me,
Lovely
yeah.
market. The farmers, and there's a clothing. In fact, it was rated in a London magazine about 2 or 3 years ago. It was rated one of the top 12 markets in the world.
Wow.
So it really is a good market.
Yeah. Wow.
So we're fortunate to be on that market. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Hey, well, it's great seeing you. I like your
Okay, Rick.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Well, say hi to
during COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Back my hand till the week. The barber shops, you know, the haircut could only have a haircut about 2 weeks ago. The barber shops are all closed for 3 or 4 months as well. As I say, our lockdown was one of the tightest in the world. No, so not much was open, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, well, have a wonderful day.
Okay, Rick. Nice
Okay.
to speak.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. Bye.
Cheers.